name, please respond. In the affirmative, Mr. Rafter,
Here.
Mr. Carberg,
Here.
Ms. Sylvia,
Here.
Ms. Perales.
Here.
Anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. Mr. Mackey or Ms. Marshall of Anderson and Krieger. I don't see them in the participants list at this point either, so we'll come back to them. Mr. Walsh,
Here.
Mr. Grokey,
Rocky here.
Grocky, sorry, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Sukop,
Here.
Mr. Lasden,
Here.
thank you. Good evening. This open meeting of the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. The meeting will be aired at a later time on the Town of Nantucket YouTube channel. For Zoom meetings, please note the meeting is being recorded. All attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Meeting materials, all supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. We're now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, and motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in conversation with other members, please do so through the chair. Take care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. This meeting is being both audio and video recorded. So we will move to item 2 of our agenda, which is to review and approve the agenda. Are there any comments, questions, or concerns with the agenda before us tonight? Hearing none, we'll consider that adopted. We need to review and approve the draft minutes from our August 10th, 2021 meeting. Is there a motion? Is there any comments, questions, concerns, or a motion to adopt those minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and second. Mr. Buscarin, any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Buscarin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer,
Aye.
Ms. Topham,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. We have to ratify our 8/18/21 and 9/8/21 warrants. Are there any discussions, questions, concerns?
I'll make that motion.
So we have a motion to ratify the 2 warrants. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Buscarin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer,
Aye.
Ms. Topham,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Aye.
chair votes aye. Next, we have public comment for any items which are not on the agenda. If there's any public comment, please either raise your hand using the Zoom function or speak up.
Paul Grocke here. Not sure if I'm jumping the gun in terms of just making a comment, but just wanted to jump in whenever appropriate.
Yes, Mr. Grocke, I believe that item 6 on our agenda, we will have a presentation and then certainly afford public comment on that agenda item.
Thank you. I'll wait till item 6. Thank you.
Hearing no other public comment, we will open a public hearing to consider revisions to the town regulation codification update of chapter 203 airport regulations. And I have a statement to read for that. This is a public hearing, September 14th, 2021, for the revision of town regulation codification updated of chapter 203 airport regulations. Welcome. This evening, we are holding a public hearing on proposed changes to the Nantucket Memorial Airport regulations as part of a larger project with town administration with the purpose of codifying and streamlining all town regulations into a more meaningful and unified manner. In your packet, you will find a handout of the changes made to the regulations during codification project. Listed are the Chapter 203 airport regulation changes that are included in the draft town regulations, as well as proposed changes not included in the draft town regulations, Chapter 203 airport regulations. And with that, the public hearing is open, and I will turn the floor over to Mr. Rafter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned before, this is an effort in conjunction with the town to codify all the department's rules and regulations. And the changes that the airport are looking at, there are 9, and I would consider them fairly minor. Changing one section to the airport manager instead of the airport manager or his representative. There's a change regarding lost and found. Relocation and of parked or stored aircraft, or vehicles, I'm sorry, and APU limiting them to 15 minutes is another change. Some event coordination on special events requiring some additional information. And the definition of mechanic for an A&P purpose is also a change. And the others are changing what was the Massachusetts Aeronautics Commission to the Mass DOT Aeronautics Division. So, as I say, they're fairly minor, but this is part of the hearing process, so we'd like to hear from the public if they have any questions or comments or concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Rafter. Commission members, any questions, comments, or concerns on the proposed regulation changes?
No.
Okay, hearing none. I'll open this up to the public. Is there any members of the public that have any questions, comments, or concerns, or would like to discuss the proposed changes? Please either raise your hand or speak up and I'll acknowledge you. Hearing and seeing none. No further discussion. Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to close the public hearing. Mr. Buscarin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Is there with the public hearing closed, any further deliberation by the commission? Hearing none, we would entertain a motion to adopt the proposed changes.
I'll make that motion. I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Hearing no further discussion. Mr. Buscarin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have pending leases and contracts as set forth on Exhibit 1, which exhibit is here and incorporated by reference to the agenda. Mr. Rafter?
Thank you. The first is a contract amendment with Jacobs Engineering Group, and that is a change to the taxiway echo project for $39,611. That is for the work that was done on the taxiway A intersection. You may recall in a prior phase of the construction, we had some issues with that. And this project is 100% funded by FAA. Next is a contract amendment with Computer Assistance Services. They're our IT consultant for $46,000, and that's to reflect essentially some of the work that has been completed already, or not already, I'm sorry. It's an additional amount because of some of the work we need to get done, but it's a single contract. So next is a contract from McFarland Johnson for $22,857, and that is to prepare an RFP for a preventative maintenance contract for our security system. And then the last is a contract with Ascent Aviation Group for $48,600, and that is for logistics and mobilization of the temporary fuel farm. You had approved a contract earlier and it identified that these costs would be identified at a later date, but we were responsible for it. So this is the amendment for that.
Thank you, Mr. Rafter. Commission members, any questions or concerns on any of the pending? They're all contracts. Is there a motion?
Looking for a motion to approve?
Yes,
Arthur.
sir.
Yeah, I'll make that.
Motion's been made to approve the pending contracts and contracts amended as listed on Exhibit 1. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Hearing no further discussion. Mr. Buscarin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Aye.
Ms. Topham?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Thank you. Moving on to item 6, we have a discussion regarding Mr. Walsh and a notice of violation of requirements for access to the airports and notice of restriction. And I'll turn this over to Mr. Rafter.
Thank you. As you may recall, in an informal decision from FAA, it permitted Mr. Walsh to fly in and out of the airport, but it also allowed the airport to institute procedures as to how he would use the airport, which we did develop. However, he continued to disregard those procedures, and he was delivered a notice on August 25th of this year of the violations and a reinstitution of the full notice of restriction as transmitted previously to him in a letter dated July 2nd, 21, and supplemented August 25th of 2020. In accordance with the airport rules and regulations, I'm advising the Commission of these actions accordingly. Subsequently, we had received a fax that is in your packet from Mr. Walsh's attorney requesting that this meeting to discuss this matter be adjourned until he has had adequate time to obtain documents from FAA and others. And while I understand and respect this request, I'm required under the rules and regulations to notify you of the actions I've taken. And I believe there are 2 items for you to consider. Well, one, I'm sorry, is the first that I notify the Commission. And if you elect to continue this discussion to a further meeting, I would still, I believe it's, I need to continue the restriction in place. I don't know that that's something the Commission can defer or not. I don't know if the legal is on, but I want to make everybody aware of the actions that I've taken.
Thank you, Mr. Rafter. Is there any, I think if it's okay with the Commission, we'll hear from Mr. Walsh's attorney, and then we will further discuss any questions, unless you have anything right now. Mr. Garkey?
Thank you very much. I'll just keep it short. As Mr. Rafter said, I sent in a letter just requesting that this matter be adjourned until we can receive and review records, just to make sure we're adequately prepared and can have all the relevant evidence. And Mr. Rafter touched on the second point and sorry, just as a matter to note too, at the airport's attorney, I believe she had indicated to me she recommended that she would request that the adjournment be granted. And then Mr. Rafter made the second point where I would respectfully request that the no trespass order be stayed until such time as we the adjournment during the, excuse me, the duration of the adjournment. I just think it's, the no trespass order is, a serious restriction on liberty. And I don't think Mr. Walsh has any conduct that's alleged has created a risk that would seriously prevent a stay. So I would just request both the adjournment and a stay of the no trespass order.
Thank you, Mr. Grocke.
Thanks.
Mr.
Is there
Chair,
any-
if I may,
Yes, Mr. Rafter.
I just want, I don't know if you've noticed, but our attorney, Christina Marshall, is with us. And I'll let her opine on that, but my reasoning for continuing the restriction is because it is a very serious safety issue. Mr. Walsh has taxied across grass areas that are not meant for taxiing. He has not followed appropriate orders as to where to taxi his aircraft and operate it. And that's why I'd like to continue this restriction.
Thank you, Mr. Rafter. If I may, Mr. Grocke and also Ms. Marshall, would you be anticipating to be ready in 1 month for the next commission meeting to proceed with the discussion on this matter?
Just to be quite frank, I kind of depends on how quickly I can get records turned around, both from the airport and I anticipate requesting some from the FAA as well. I know just from other matters, FOIA requests to the FAA have been a little bit slow, but basically it'll be dependent upon how quickly we can get records turned around. But I would love to, and I'm sure Mr. Walsh would as well. The sooner the better, I think, for everybody.
Understood. Ms. Marshall, do you have anything that you would care to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just 2 quick points. I think both of them have been covered, but let me reiterate them. The decision to continue this meeting to allow Mr. Walsh and his attorney time to gather more information is certainly one that's up to the commission. I perceive it to be a reasonable request. And I think the decision whether or not to temporarily lift the no trespass order during that continuance is likely one that is also still at the discretion of the commission. But my recommendation would be to defer at this point to the airport manager until the commission has had the opportunity to receive kind of all of the relevant evidence from both sides and make a final decision after that point. And I'm happy to answer any more specific questions.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Is there anybody else that would like to make any comments? And then I'll go back to the commission.
I would like to make a comment. Bob Walsh.
Yes, Mr. Walsh.
Yes, my name is Bob Walsh, and I feel I've been treated unfairly by 3 management individuals for the past 3 years. Their actions are unjustified and continuous. Can you please change the people dealing with me to someone else who can be impartial? These are FAA investigations. We are dealing with FAA. The airport has turned these investigations over to the FAA, just as they have in the past. And the restriction on the no trespassing restriction was in May, I believe. Mr. Carberg had a police officer serve me with a no trespassing restriction from the Nantucket police. And what that stated was that I was allowed, as it is the law, that I am allowed to use as a transient pilot with all the qualifications and the airplanes and all that stuff. I can use the airport. I must be able to use the airport. That's what it says in the law. And Mr. Carlberg stated that I was able to use the south ramp, which is where and only the south ramp, which is where my airplanes get parked. And I'm able to go into the FBO directly with myself and my passengers and go from the FBO back to my airplane and leave. That no trespass restriction is not warranted, but it is fair. It is what the law states. And I signed that no trespass order. And I'm willing to go by that no trespass order. And Mr. Rafter states that I did not follow his rules about calling and this, but I did follow his rules on calling. That's why this last thing, I have to call an hour beforehand. That's not really what every other transient pilot has to do, but I have to call an hour before I take off from the airport or I get into the airport. I played that game. I called the line crew almost every time. I started out doing the email, but he says, I said to do an email to the dispatch there. I mean, the FBO. I did that. And then they quote and they say, oh no, it said you have to go to the FBO and to the line shack, line crew. We gave you two places you have to notify, you know, both of them, not just one, or you can just call the line shack, and which I did. From then on, I do not do any emails to them because I'm not, you know, I call the line shack and I talk to the line shack and I talk to that lineman, Blaine, about taxiing across the grass like I have for the past 15 years. And he says, no, Bob, he says, they don't want you taxiing across the grass. And I said, well, I'll have to push my airplane back, you know? He says, no, we'll push the airplane back, you know, don't worry about it. I said, okay. So I don't go across the grass anymore. Okay. And they, if they're going to put that restriction back in to Mr. Carberg's restriction, which I think it was only for 60 days, and it's over 60 days. If they want to reinstate that, I'm fine with it. But when I have people coming and telling me that I can't land at, I had Dave Sylvia approach my airplane on August 1st to say that they're reinstating the July 2nd no trespassing order, which was deemed to be not legal. Mr. Carberg's is legal. I'll abide by it, and I'll continue calling the line shack and do everything that they say, as I have in the past. So, thank you for listening.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I'll open up the matter to commissioners' discussion, comments.
Tony Buscarin, Mr. Chairman. I think having read the allegations made by the airport manager, Tom Rafter, I'm very much inclined to continue the no trespass order until such evidence may be produced by Mr. Walsh that he didn't do the things as described by the airport manager. So my vote would be to continue the no trespass order.
Thank you, Mr. Buscarin. Anything further from anyone else? I would hope that we could continue this to our very next meeting and then, you know, have the evidence
Ask Abba if he's got plans, because he was talking about it.
Presented and get the documents that you need that we're in control of as quickly as possible. Obviously, we can't speak to the FAA, and then try to resolve this, at least keep it as an agenda item and have it be a 1 month continuance, essentially, of this matter would be my suggestion. It's up to the commission.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Buscarin. I believe it should stay as it is.
As it is, as Mr. Carlberg on 5, I think it was 25 on May 25th, he gave me a no trespassing order that I agreed to and I signed. But at 60 days, that ran out. Are you saying that you want to reinstate that no trespassing order? I agree.
Mr. Walsh, I will, I'll defer to Mr. Rafter or Ms. Marshall as to what would be in force and effect until the next meeting.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I really don't want to get into it here, but Mr. Walsh claims he abided by those things and he did not. The FAA did allow us to establish certain procedures, and we did, and he did not comply with those. And that's why we're going forward with reinstating the full ban, the full restriction. I'll ask legal for advice, but I believe if we continue, Mr. Walsh made a lot of representations that were not accurate. We have all the documentation. We've sent that in a letter to him on the dates and times when he did not comply. And it's just like everything else that we've dealt with on this case. The longer we continue, the more he's going to continue to disregard any procedures or anything we put in place. And he has total disregard for any of our objectives.
So if I may, I think that's probably more of a matter for us to further discuss at the next hearing, once everybody has the documents they're seeking. But just for clarity, the support of the position that is based on the last notice which you sent him, which is that it's a complete no trespass order on the airport property. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that's the latest.
Okay. Thank you. Is there a motion or any, Ms. Marshall, do you, if I may, do you suggest any particular action by the commission, or simply that the decision of the manager stands and we just continue this matter to our next meeting?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that that would likely suffice the continuance with no final action by the commission on the notice of restriction.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Is there any further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, we will be sure that this matter is on our next agenda, and hopeful that we can get these documents, that you can receive everything you need in a very timely fashion.
I have a comment.
Yes, of course, Mr. Buscarin.
Sure. I think we should poll the entire commission on whether or not there's a no trespass order until our next meeting. I think we should support the airport manager and not have Mr. Walsh visit Nantucket until the next meeting. So I don't know what the other commissioners think.
I'm in agreement with Mr. Buscarin.
So would you like to put that? I mean, I believe our advice from council was nothing further is needed, but any commissioner is free to make a motion if you would like to.
I'd like to make a motion to support our airport manager in banning Mr. Walsh from flying to Nantucket until the next meeting, when we can consider further evidence.
I'll second that motion.
Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the matter?
I'd like to say that is illegal. You cannot, you must.
Mr. Walsh, I'm going to have to,
go ahead.
I let you speak, and at this point, the motion's been made and it's deliberation by the commission.
Mr. Chair, if I may interject a point of clarification here, and I think we're all on the same page, but so the record's clear. The no trespass order is that Mr. Walsh may not pilot his own plane into and out of Nantucket Airport. The restriction does not extend to his activities as a commercial, on commercial flights, or, you know, any of his travel outside of piloting the planes.
Passenger,
I appreciate that clarification, Ms. Marshall. Mr. Buscarin, would you accept a friendly amendment to clarify the language of your motion in line with council's advice?
I didn't understand council's advice. I think it was muddled. I think we either have a ban Mr. Walsh from landing until the next meeting, or we don't. You know, I don't know what her addendum would be and what that means. If he's not allowed to pilot any aircraft into Nantucket, whether it's a commercial activity or a personal activity, I think that's what we should do. And we can revisit this at the next meeting. But you know, I didn't understand what our council was advising.
Let me clarify. I apologize. Mr. Walsh is not prohibited under the current no trespass order from traveling as a commercial passenger.
Okay.
I think that word may have been missing from my speech, so I apologize, but that is all I meant.
That I understand. So he's not, we're basically, my motion is that he's not allowed to fly into Nantucket Airport as pilot in command of any aircraft until the next meeting, when we can reconsider other evidence that he might want to present. That's my motion.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. My only discussion on that was I would wonder if it would be better worded to simply a motion that would support the action of the airport manager and not get into the specifics as to what he's allowed or not allowed to do. And this might be semantics, but I think in these cases that how things are voted and put forth are important.
Well, I can amend the motion to support the airport manager's decision to ban Mr. Walsh from flying as a pilot in command, to fly as pilot in command into the Nantucket Airport. And we will revisit this at the next meeting.
If I may, Mr. Rafter, is that motion consistent with the no trespass order that you issued?
Yes, I believe it is.
Ms. Marshall, do you have any concern with that motion as it stands?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, is there any further discussion from any commissioners? Mr. Buscarin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer,
Aye.
Ms. Topham,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Aye.
and Chair votes aye. Thank you, Mr. Grocke, Mr. Walsh, and we will have this on the agenda for the next meeting. And Ms. Marshall, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Moving on to pending matters, item 7, we have a capital approval process and home rule petition update. Mr. Rafter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. That item, known as H 3792, has been referred to the House Committee on Bills in the third reading, which apparently is the final step in the process. So it looks like we're in the final stretch that hopefully we'll have that home rule petition approved, which is going to be critical if there's any additional funding available coming from Washington. So we're hopeful on that side. The next item is the Pfos update, and I'll turn it over to Noah. He's got a couple of different items there. The IRA status report and some groundwater sampling review.
Just quickly before we go to that, commissioners, does anybody have any questions or comments on the capital approval process or the home rule petition update? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be sure. Mr. Rafter? Excuse me, Mr. Carberg.
Thank you, Mr. Rafter, and thank you, Mr. Chair. For my PFOS report, we have an activity report available as a handout in your packet. It's unchanged since August, with 462 samples taken from 77 private wells. Since August, we have provided Massdep and uploaded to our website IRA status report number 10. Weston Solutions staff are in the meeting today, and at the conclusion of my report, they'll briefly give more detail on the IRA submission. And then Weston staff will also, at the conclusion of my report, introduce the concept for a future task order that will then be on the commission exhibit for your review in October. There is one supporting figure in your packet for this. The basis is additional groundwater sampling and monitoring, and assistance for us to understand that resource. The idea between presenting this now is to solicit feedback, so we would be able to execute a task order at the October meeting. For additional activity, miscellaneous sampling and MCP items, we have the topic of bottled water provision. There are currently 29 residences that are receiving bottled water, where these residents are under 20 parts per trillion, and actually I believe they're all under 16 parts per trillion, being provided such out of an abundance of caution as directed under the MCP. We are at the phase of the investigation where the regulated party typically begins to evaluate the strategy of discontinuing the provision of bottled water for homes in this circumstance. Our consultant team advises us that this can become a contentious item between the regulated party and communities during this stage of the MCP. So we approach accordingly and we spend some time considering our next steps. There are two parts of this that I wanted to outline. The IRA status report contains a technical discussion of the evaluation to discontinue. I believe this is in section 3.4. And our LSP will confirm that this section, along with the other sections of the IRA update, meets the MCP requirements in an upcoming meeting with Massdep. So that's the technical aspect. And that would mean, with that approval, that it would be okay with the DEP if the airport were to discontinue water service. But that doesn't mean that we must do so immediately. Sort of the when and how is a further discussion for us to implement. We will need to take this step at some point, but there are other items that are part of the consideration. You know, we want to be sure we perform outreach, notice, frequently asked questions in advance are a good idea. And I think we can consider other project timing and how that relates, such as the timing of the water main installation and the water services. I think ideally we'd like to understand the implications a little bit better with LSP and council and report back next month with some options. And then for a breakout of where the water service would likely be discontinued, my understanding at this time is that it would be 7 residences on Matagashim Valley Road, 12 on the west side, and 10 on Novadear Way. And I have more items, but I wanted to stop there, Mr. Chair, if there were any questions before continuing. Okay, moving on for taxiway.
Sorry, Mr. Carver, just quickly, does the commission have any questions or want to further discuss the point of the bottled water being continued? And I would ask Mr. Carver, is that a decision that is going to be made tonight or at a future meeting?
I would intend to bring it back in October with more information and more discussion. I really don't have what I think is enough information on the number of homes, all of the other factors we should consider. And I think it needs some more discussion and review.
Thank you. I know that I will just add that, having read it, and one of the things I mentioned to Mr. Carver is I'm wondering if there's a distinction between the properties that have detect but below the 20 versus the properties that are non-detect but are simply the step out properties within the 500 feet. And if maybe there's a line that gets drawn there between which ones continue to get the bottled water and not. Ms. Topham?
I had a question. How do the residents or the people in those homes feel? Have we taken any kind of a survey or gotten any information from them? How they feel about this now being delayed a little bit longer, or do they feel it's going quick enough for them?
I last communicated with, it's been a few months, and it was just on the general topic of how long water service typically lasts under investigations and it then being taken away. residents tend to, it's a contentious point because residents don't like to see bottled water taken away. It's a matter of trust. It's an investigation that leaves a lot of questions open for them. I think residents very much want to be connected to town water and want to be assured that they have some kind of solution before the bottled water is discontinued. I think that's generally the truth that I've experienced.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
And I look forward to discussing it further at the next meeting. I certainly have some concern with discontinuing folks that have a detect level, especially if we can, it's a short duration until we're actually going to be able to, relatively short duration, till we're actually going to be able to have a water main in front of their properties.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Buscarin.
Yeah, my thought is, we're spending a lot of money to take care of this issue and have good public relations. I think we ought to continue to supply bottled water. This is a pretty low cost item of short duration. I think by this time next year, all these people will have town water, and hopefully we won't have any negative comment from anybody.
Thanks. It's certainly my feeling as well. Anything further from anyone else?
No, and that's my feeling also. Thank you.
Mr. Carver?
Thank you. We've resumed taxiway echo reconstruction for the phase between Bravo and Juliet. The recommendation from the LSP is that even with the recognition of the S3 soil standards under the PPA exclusion area for the airport, that the best practice under the DEP's anti-degradation clause would be not to remove construction-related soils from this area to off-airport areas for storage. So we've identified alternate storage locations for these piles inside of the fence of Jacobs. And while this does end up being a disruptive project to Echo and the contractor's operations, it's something we believe we can accommodate. It is, however, another cost and staff time resource that we need to respond to with our PFOS project related to a big AIP capital project. For the Sandpit investigation, Weston is on site this week, I believe, to characterize the soil contamination in the Sandpit, so east of the approach to runway 6. We look forward to reporting out those detailed soils information, and I assume it will be the October or November timeframe. Weston is also working to review and update the PPA exclusion area with Massdep. So PPA is an abbreviation we discussed in the previous meeting for potentially productive aquifer exclusion. It's a designation of a previously existing geographical area of the airport. However, it looks like it was misaligned or misrecorded. It shifted a little bit to the north of where it should be, and Weston will address that with the DEP. And then as a matter of course with the MCP, drinking water sampling or sampling of POET systems will be moving from monthly to quarterly. And again, that is consistent with the data that we've obtained in the monitoring from this point forward and from up to this point in the MCP. For the water service project, the current owners of 35, I'm not sure if it's a current owner, I'll just say 35 Evergreen has informed us that they have completed the water service work and will return the water services agreement to the airport with receipt of invoices. We look forward to crossing this first set of our homes off our list. We're still owed a little bit of information, but we're looking forward to what we hope is the beginning of a quick resolution for the outstanding water services. 5 other homes have also submitted their application to Wannacomet Water Company for water service. And again, as a reminder, the first step we've ID'd with these owners is that they will submit their application for water service to Wannacomet Water Company. Wannacomet Water Company can then schedule the excavation and curb stop installation, with the fee arrangement being made between the airport and the water company. At this time, one of the homes in the area is still outstanding for a response despite multiple reminders. We'll just keep on it and keep that moving. Robert B. Auer, who is the contractor for the water main, is interested in performing the private side plumbing and excavation work for the water services, which is great news. As you recall, we've gone through 14, maybe 15 now local plumbers. So Robert B. Auer is in the process of scheduling the site review of the homes with McFarland Johnson. We're hopeful, this could be a very positive development, and we hope it gives us an option for owners to have the airport sponsored installment as an option, in addition to the option of the homeowner performing the work and submitting to us for reimbursement. For the water main project, I believe I reported out last month, this was pushed back to November 1st due to supply chain issues in sourcing the PVC main. The good news is that it hasn't been pushed back further. Robert B. Auer still believes in the November 1st start date. They've also indicated that the delay will probably cause them to reorder the phasing. We'll wait to hear from them what this phasing will be. Mattoxam Valley Road may be first in the reordered phase instead of last. We'll have to see. We're expecting them to advise in early October based on the information and shipment information once received from all of their suppliers. And this is also a coordination item with the town. The town has a number of public works projects going on this fall, open roads, road closures. So we're looking to coordinate that closely with the town. We'll be taking out ads in the paper. We'll be flyering residences. We want to make sure that our whole community understands the impact and the phasing of this work as it's scheduled to occur. We're still looking at a 142-day duration. Our consultant and Robert B. Auer were on site last week to walk through the final landside routing of the main. We had previously assessed the airside portions during last month's pre-construction meeting. And again, we're grateful for the commission's leadership and for the Wannacommon Water Company, for Mark Willett and their commission's coordination and effort on this. We couldn't have done it without them. A few more miscellaneous items before I turn it over to Mr. Sukup. We have reviewed a state revolving fund application, which could provide a low interest loan for the water main and other potential remediation efforts. The next step that we will make is to reach out to town finance and state revolving fund staff to schedule a pre-application meeting to review that application. McFarland Johnson has identified the alternative vendor to provide catch basin investigative work and cleaning related to the fuel farm. Eastern Pipe Services has provided us a October 1st mobilization date, and we'll look to confirm that. And I also wanted to, as my last item, update the commission on two different threads of public comments we've just received and we've been responding to over the last month. Predominantly west of the airport, we've heard from a number of homeowners with PFOS levels in their homes below 20 parts per trillion, and they've been expressing concern over the lack of further testing immediately available to them, or non-inclusion in the airport's water main and water service connection projects. And we've been responding and working with them as best we can. We will continue to do so. In the Mattoxam Valley Road area, homeowners have reached out. They've been very positive on timeline. They're looking forward to sort of understanding and facilitating the connection process, getting that coordinated and moving on. So be happy to take any questions and or then defer it to Weston Solutions staff to present briefly on the IRA status update and the scope of work for future groundwater monitoring.
Thank you, Mr. Carberg. Commissioners, Mr. Buscarin?
Yes, I'm just asking Mr. Carberg whether we need to do anything on a public relations point of view to the people who have questions to the west of the airport about the extent of the plume and our responsibility there. It seems to me we've adequately investigated that situation there, but does Mr. Carberg think we need to do anything else to make sure people feel like we're dealing fairly with them?
That's a very good question. At the end of the day, I don't know. It's something I'd like to take back. We've retained obviously McFarland Johnson. They have some very good PR staff who we've used on our previous public sessions. They have a good idea of where residents' concerns are. They've helped us develop facts. So I'd like to review that with them and maybe even with some homeowners and report back out on it. That's all right.
That's great.
And just to that point, and I was going to keep this up for part of Mr. Sukop's presentation, unless he had other materials, but you can see this is from our packet, representing the extent of testing which has been done on that west side of the airport. Any other commissioners have questions or comments based on Mr. Carberg's presentation? I'll turn it over to Mr. Sukop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And also thank you for sharing this diagram. I was wondering how we were going to work that logistically.
Is there any, if I may, if there's anything you would like me for the packet, any particular pages to put up, please let me know. I'm happy to scroll through this.
Excellent. Well, let me, before we will start with the first one at the top there. But let me, before we get to those, and we talk about the upcoming work, let me quickly summarize the IRA plan that was submitted on August 31st. It was also uploaded to the airport website the following day. That plan summarized the results of the groundwater and soil and groundwater sampling that we conducted during the last 6 months, the first 6 months of the year, and as we discussed on our at the last meeting. So I'm not going to go through that information again. But that was the bulk of that document. We also included a feasibility assessment, as Mr. Carberg noted earlier, that supported the termination of bottled water to the homes that had less than the drinking water standard of 20 parts per trillion of Pfos compounds. I did want to clarify a couple of statements that were made earlier. I believe one question was whether homes that were non-detect were receiving bottled water, and that is the case. I'm sorry, homes that, just to be clear, homes that were non-detect for PFAS, so they did not contain any detectable level of PFAS, are not provided with bottled water, regardless of their proximity to other homes. So I think the point was made earlier that within 500 feet, those homes were receiving bottled water. They're not. So just to be clear, so all of the 29 homes that Mr. Carberg mentioned are all homes where PFAS has been detected in the water supply, just at concentrations less than 16, which again is 80% of the drinking water standard of 20. So just to be clear on that. Also to kind of put some context around that, with regard to the timing on that, it was included again in the IRA report. That had been submitted to Massdep. They're reviewing that document. We have not gotten concurrence from them that we can terminate the bottled water, but we anticipate that will be forthcoming in the next month or so. So hopefully before next meeting, we'll have a concurrence that we can, if we so choose, to terminate the bottled water to those homes. So that's pending. There was also some discussion about the cost of this. Just to give you some general numbers, and I understand we'll talk about some options, present some options at the next meeting, but right now for the 29 homes that we're providing bottled water to, it's about $9,500 per month. So just under $10,000 per month for those approximately 30 homes, which totals up to about $110,000 per year. So the savings would be about $110,000 per year. Roughly, it's $310 per home per month to supply bottled water. So just to, again, give you some context there as you guys are thinking about that and considering the path forward. Shifting now to the upcoming work. Mr. Chair, if you wanted to bring up that figure you had earlier, the 2 figures, that would be helpful. The next phase of work is, well, it's ongoing. The soil sampling is going to be occurring this week in the sand pit, as Mr. Carberg had mentioned earlier. If you can scroll up to the there you go, perfect. This is a diagram which shows the locations for the shallow soil sampling that we're going to be conducting in the sand pit. And the reason that we're investigating the sand pit at this time relative to some of the other application areas is that this area has been identified as a possible location for storage of excess soils from other capital improvement projects, such as the fuel farm work and the upcoming taxiway echo work. Mr. Carberg mentioned earlier that the intent is to try and keep soil from those excess soil from those projects on the airport property within the fence line. So this is a potential area where we could do that, but we need to document what the existing contamination levels are at the location before we start bringing it in and putting soil there, which would restrict our access from further assessment going down the road. So we want to get this done now. We're kind of putting this on a fast track relative to the other application areas, HFF application areas. So we've got about 16 locations here, shallow soil sample locations. And then we also anticipate doing 2 to 3 deeper borings as well, based on the results of the shallow soil sampling results. And again, the shallow soil work is being conducted now because we can do that without the use of a drilling equipment. The deeper work, we require the drilling work. So the mobilization for the next phase of work is anticipated to be in November to accommodate the ferry schedule, again, to get the drilling equipment over to the island. We anticipate it will be between 10 and 15 days of work, of working days. Again, the soil sampling in the sand pit would be targeting those 3 deeper locations. So we would advance borings down to the water table, collecting samples along the way. We would analyze select number of those samples for PFAS to get an idea of the vertical extent of PFAS impacts at this location. If you could scroll down to the next figure, Mr. Chairman, that would be appreciated. The majority of the work that's scheduled for or proposed for this fall would be focusing on the groundwater impacts on the airport property. And we will be evaluating that through the use of groundwater grab samples, where we do not install a monitoring well, but we advance the drill rig tooling down to the water table. We penetrate the water table about 5 feet into the water table, and we collect the water sample, and we analyze that, send that water sample to the laboratory for analysis for PFAS. So we are proposing 36 locations, which are the dots that are scattered across this map. You'll note that there are 2 colors of dots. Some are yellow and some are red. The yellow dots are going to be the groundwater grab samples I mentioned. So we would be obtaining a sample, but not installing any type of well. So it's just a sample. We're not getting any groundwater elevation data at those locations. The red dots, we are proposing to install temporary piezometers. And the intent there is to allow us to measure a water level. We heard loud and clear from the commission at the last meeting that we are interested in refining our understanding of groundwater flow directions, because so much of our work depends on the interpretation of groundwater flow. So we wanted to supplement the existing monitoring well network with these additional temporary points, which will allow us to, we will then survey get an elevation survey, and that will allow us to calculate the groundwater elevation at those, which we can then combine with groundwater elevations measured in the existing monitoring wells on the airport, and develop an updated groundwater contour map, which will verify groundwater flow directions. So we thought it was important to add that part of it. In addition, and there just to quantify that, there will be 10. There's 10 red dots, so there will be 10 locations, and you can see they're kind of scattered around the airport to the north and also to the east side, where we don't have very much monitoring well elevation data. So it'll supplement that and give us a good distribution of points. In addition to the temporary points for groundwater elevation, we will also be doing 1 location at the west end, up in the vicinity of taxiway or South Ramp at B. where we will be going deeper into the water tables. The other samples we've been collecting, and like I said, in the top 5 to 10 feet of the aquifer. This one we are going to push down 50 feet into the aquifer and collect the sample. And this is the residential wells that are in this that surround the airport are generally screened from between in the top 50 feet of the aquifer. So again, we've been targeting the sampling in the upper top of the aquifer. So this will allow us to get a sample from the deeper, which is more consistent with the bottom of where the deeper portion of where those residential wells are. So what this will tell us is how much is the PFAS penetrating into the aquifer, or is it mostly up near the top? So we'll be gathering that data. In addition, we're also going to be doing, this is the last thing, you can see where it says continuous logging. There's a point, you may recall, we discussed at some length at the last meeting that one groundwater sample we tried to collect, but we did not encounter groundwater even down to a depth of 80 feet. And we were a little puzzled as to why that was. It didn't make sense to us. So we are going to drill another boring at that location and collect soil samples as we go. So what we call continuous logging. We'll get a continuous core from that location, and that'll inform us about the geology. We believe that this fact that we didn't find water there may be related to maybe some finer grain layers in the geology that we hadn't seen in other ports of the airport. So that'll allow us to evaluate that and assess that possibility. So that's the scope of the proposed work that we intend to do this fall.
Thank you, Mr. Sukop. Any commissioners have any questions for Mr. Sukop or Weston Solutions about what's been presented or the work that's being proposed? I had just a couple. The temporary monitoring wells, what would you anticipate the longevity of those are when you call them temporary? Would they be capped, and it would be something over an X period of years that could go back to, if you wanted, should there be the need for verification of data or further sampling? Is the infrastructure going to be there? When you say temporary, what does that mean, I guess?
Yeah, temporary in that we wouldn't consider that to be a long-term monitoring point. So we I think the anticipation here is that once we understand what the groundwater conditions are at the airport, we will need a long-term monitoring network. We're not anticipating that we're going to clean up the groundwater on the airport property in the near term. So we may be monitoring the site for tens of years. So we will need a permanent monitoring well network for that. The points that we're talking about now are relatively inexpensive to install. When I say temporary, though, they will be useful for the near term. And when I say near term, I'm talking probably next 2 to 3 years. We can go back to those, continue to monitor groundwater elevations at those. We can continue to update our understanding of groundwater flow directions and update as we need to. We can continue to grab samples from those as we need to. But we would not install, first of all, they would be smaller diameter wells on the order of 1 inch. Which kind of limits what you can do, the sampling technique you can use on those wells. But and we would not complete those with a locking steel standpipe protector, which we would normally do with a typical monitoring well. So it would be basically 1 inch PVC that would be sticking up out of the ground. We would put a slip cap, 1 inch slip cap over that to protect it. But it's really not designed for long-term use on the order of decades.
Thank you. And I'm just curious why we don't have any sample locations at the far sort of northeastern end of the airport, sort of on this diagram where it's shown as runway 24 stockpile. Would it not make sense? I mean, you're the experts. I'm just wondering why you wouldn't try to go as far to your limit to cast the largest net that you could.
Well, I think down the road, I think we will need to do that. I think we're somewhat limited here based on time. We can only get the drill rig on the island for so many days, so we can only get so many points done. So it's not necessarily a question of would we do that. It's more of a question of priority. We actually have 36 locations planned here on this map. That may be a challenge for us to get all 36 locations done in one mobilization. So we tried to choose the locations that would give us the most information in the most timely manner. So the locations up along that northern property line are the anticipation there, or the expectation there. Since there's no development to the north of that or up gradient from that, we really wouldn't expect to find anything there. Again, we do need to confirm at some point in the investigation that we don't have contamination coming there, because we've been surprised before, certainly in doing our investigation here at the airport. But the anticipation is that we wouldn't find anything there. So we thought the focus at this point should be on trying to determine the source of the contamination that we're seeing in the homes along MVR. And that's why if you kind of look at how we have our, and we kind of, some of the locations are kind of are single locations, other locations are in a line. They're what we call transects, where we're putting a line of wells between the known AFFF application areas and the receptors, the homes along MVR. So we try to line those up with homes where we have higher concentrations along MVR, and then where the applications are. For example, the line that's just to the south of the Sandpit. You know, we know the Sandpit was an area that received a lot of PFOS AFFF applications. We know that we've got homes along the west end of MVR that have very high concentrations. So we're going to put that line of samples in between there to see if we can connect those dots.
So it's really a limitation of sort of resources and in terms of how much time you can have them here.
Exactly.
And then will you be also taking grab samples at the temporary monitoring location? Can you get a grab sample out of a 1-inch well? Yes.
Yes, correct. Yep.
Thank you. So you'd be at those locations, both gathering groundwater elevation data as well as samples in that upper portion of the aquifer.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, the red dots would be both elevation and groundwater quality. The yellow dots are groundwater quality only.
Understood. Thank you. Anything further from any commissioners? Mr. Sukop, do you have anything further on PFAS before I do open it up for any questions from the public?
I do not.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that have any questions or on the information that's been presented tonight, or in terms of the next steps that the airport is taking? I don't. Ms. Khan?
Hi, yes, thank you for taking my question and for all this great information. I'm just trying to understand. So the purpose of the wells is to understand the water movement, which then would help us understand the movement of the plume. I think I'm just kind of concerned with how we're trying to understand this plume, mainly because with these contaminants, them being there forever, we're specifically targeting a few. Were we possibly open to looking at other methods like top assay or things of that sort that would give us a better understanding of the total PFAS? Is that something we could be looking into for the future, or just really getting a broader sense of where it is and where it's moving? I guess maybe that's my concern. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking that question.
Yes, Ms. Khan, and part of that I would have to think is also, I definitely have to defer to Mr. Sukop or Mr. Lasden.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure, I'd be happy to tackle that one. Yeah, the top analysis is for those of folks on the phone who may not be familiar with that. Just to kind of explain a little bit, the analysis that we do for PFAS, as Ms. Khan correctly noted, there are literally thousands of PFAS compounds. The laboratory capabilities at this point, we can analyze for, it varies from laboratory to laboratory, but about 30 or so of those compounds. So when we send our samples out, we're analyzing for about 30 of those compounds. Of those 30 compounds, there are only 5 that have criteria, drinking water criteria. What the top analysis does is they basically oxidize the sample. So they put chemicals into the sample that leaches all of the PFAS and converts them all into one form of PFAS. So then when you analyze it, you get the total amount of PFAS of all the compounds that's in the sample. So those values are generally higher than the sample that we, or the results that we would get from running the individual compounds. So, Ms. Khan is absolutely correct. It would give you a higher number. The problem with that is, what do we do with that data? Because we can't, there's no standard, there's no drinking water standard that we could compare that to. So we would get a number, but there's really no way for us to evaluate that number, what that number means. Whereas when we get values for the individual compounds, we can compare those to the drinking water standard and say, yes, this standard exceeds, or this standard, or this result exceeds, this result doesn't exceed. So that's the situation there.
Thank you, Mr. Sukop. Does anyone, other members of the public have any other questions? Hearing and seeing none, thank you for those that are in attendance. Mr. Sukop, thank you for your work and presentation. One other thing I was going to mention, that maybe it's an aside, but it was quite interesting when you mentioned you didn't have an occurrence of groundwater at that depth. And we had a lot of information in our packet at the beginning regarding the taxiway reconstruction and about the geology and the valleys and some of the historical stuff. And I just find it interesting and wonder how some of that, may in fact tie together in terms of, what you're finding there. I don't know if you've seen all of that information or not, but it is available.
Yeah, we'll have to circle back with Mr. Carberg and make sure that we have. I know we have seen some stuff. I'm not sure if we've seen what's in the package, but we'll certainly verify that with Mr. Carberg and make sure that we have, all the information that's available.
More general, but it's
I
found it to be quite interesting in terms of geology and perhaps how that might be influencing everything that you're looking at with respect to the water.
Absolutely.
Anything further from the commissioners? Hearing none, we'll move on. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Finance, back to you, Mr. Rafter, for our capital projects fiscal year 23 budget update. And I will I'll move that, put that on the screen as well. Please correct me if I may for a second. I don't believe we received an additional handout on this, and the one in the packet is current. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. The 22. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
And this is an update from the previous one that you saw that was about 31.9, I believe. Just to highlight some of the changes. We did have our meeting with FAA, and we added a master plan project based on our discussions with FAA. We modified down our Gate 8 Hangar 8 paving project based on more information from the consultant. We added a supplemental for the HVAC based on, again, further information from the consultant and details on that. And based upon meeting with the town administration, the housing project was scaled down to the OPM and design only, and we would initially go for that and then supplement it with a future request. And sorry, there's one more here. Give me 1 second. Oh, and the vehicle request went up slightly based on, we're going to be changing one of those vehicles into an electric vehicle, the parking lot operation. So this is the latest information. There is one that is still open somewhat. The FAA has asked for another meeting regarding decommissioning of runway 1230. So that one is the only open-ended project that we're still waiting to solidify with FAA. Any questions?
Commissioners, any questions regarding the fiscal 23 capital projects. I'll just follow up with one comment, which was related to some discussion we had at the last meeting about the A220 hard stands, and I have had additional discussion with Mr. Rafter about that. You see that it is still listed, and he has informed me he's had some discussions with the FAA about that. In short, and he can certainly speak to it further if he wishes, but my hope is that if they're going to tell us that we have to do it, they're also gonna somehow it's gonna give us a position that for funding for that. So I hope we can continue to pursue that.
The FAA does fund the capital aspect of that, but there are operational costs associated with it to go long term, and I'm going to be in communication with the FAA about that and see what we can do. So,
thank you. Anybody else have anything further on the capital improvement projects, capital projects overall? Hearing none, we'll move on to the manager's report. Mr. Rafter.
Thank you. On the project side of the house, taxiway echo work has resumed in the area between taxiways Charlie and Delta. A lot of operational challenges going on. Noah, Preston, Johnny, the whole crew are doing a great job on working with the contractor, the FAA, and the consultant. But that project is moving along. Security phase 2, contractors due out shortly to complete some additional work and punch list items. Fuel farm rehab work is due to begin early October and continue through the early part of January. Thank you for the contract amendment earlier. That was to ship the temporary fuel farm to the island. Hangar development, no change there. We're still waiting on some comments back. Exhibit A is a project that we're beginning work on and doing some history search on some land to quantify and clean up our Exhibit A that's required under FAA. On the bid status, we have, we mentioned earlier, the contract going for the RFP for our security system. We have an RFQ out for the OPM for our terminal optimization project. The deadline for that is September 20. I'm sorry, it was public on September, will be public on September 22nd, and the deadline is October 14th. Car rental, we're continuing to work with legal to finalize that. And the HVAC project, Stantec is working to reissue the IFP this fall. We talked about the A220 update. I mentioned the meeting regarding 1230 and decommissioning with FAA. There was a workshop held by the select board on facilities master plan, which discussed some of the options for DPW campus, and we've provided additional information to the town manager on their site there so they can take that into consideration. Continuing to work with through the parking operation. We're dealing with some legal issues relating to the merchant of record. And just a note, total sales for Labor Day weekend were $732,421, which is $346,000 above last year, or a 90% increase. Granted, last year was a COVID year, but at the same time, we were pretty strong, so that well exceeds a lot of the other numbers. Any questions before I go into statistics?
Anyone?
Okay.
Hearing none, please proceed.
And I want to keep the statistics brief because they're getting very long, and that's somewhat of a good sign because of the number of different services that we have. However, operations are up 49.2% over last July. Southwest GA ramp operations for August are up 15%. Employments are up 182% over last July. And again, that was a pandemic. Not quite as high as 2020, but they did exceed FY19. And again, not going into all the detail by airline and market, but I do want the commission to understand that the level of service that we have in this peak season here is extremely high quality air service. We have service to 16 cities, 11 of which are major hubs. And any small airport that's a tremendous service. A lot of small airports only have 3 or 4 flight or destinations, and a handful, maybe 1 or 2 major hubs. So that's great service, and things are going well on that side. The jet fuel sold for July was up 67%, for August up 26%. Avgas was up 36%, and in July, the freight continues to do well, it was up 36.8%. And noise complaints were 33, which is down from 44 over last July, and details are in your packet. And that's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Rafter. And do any commissioners have any questions or comments on Mr. Rafter's report? I'm hearing none. We will move on to commissioners' comments, and we have one item to discuss, which was carried forward regarding commission meetings, remote versus in person. And we can open it up to discussion. I'm not sure that the town with the current mask order has facilities for us yet to have a meeting. I don't know how the commission feels. We could try to pursue that again further with them, or whether or not we want to continue with this format until such time. And I believe we'd have to be masked as well as anyone attending. We had a meeting publicly. Or if you all agree that we should continue in this format until such time that the mask mandate is lifted, or anything else.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
do you mind if I just share something before you guys discuss?
that would be very helpful.
With the preparation of this being on the agenda, I reached out to town administration, and they updated me that all meetings are now being held remotely again, and that the trailer that they're hoping to finish and will be our meeting place is not yet complete.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Buscarin.
Sounds like we're going remote, Mr. Chairman.
So it does sound that way. Does anyone else have anything to add, or we just simply stay the course until such time there's a space for us? Okay, unless anyone feels different, that's how we'll proceed. Is there any public comment do any commissioners have any other comments? Hearing none, is there any public comment for items that were not on the agenda, or for something that was discussed? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to go into executive session per general law, chapter 38, section 21. To review the executive session minutes enumerated on the agenda for possible release, and the minutes from 8/10/21 for review and possible release. B, clauses 3 and 4, discuss strategy with respect to litigation regarding Robert Walsh, where the chair has determined that an open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the airport commission, and further to discuss strategies with respect to the deployment of security personnel devices in connection with the no trespass order issued against Mr. Walsh. Item C, clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect to pursuing legal claims against the manufacturer of Pfos, where the chair has determined an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the airport commission. And item D, clause 6, to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real estate with respect to the negotiations regarding Nobody Farm Road, Sun Island property, where the chair has determined that an open session may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the airport commission. Is there such a motion?
I'll make that motion.
And is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Buscarin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Thank you all very much.